Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to NightMareGiver. This narration is a story provided with permission by Gamalfrank on the NoSleep community on Reddit, who has graciously allowed me to narrate his story today. Please support the author by seeing his posts on Reddit, as well as his novella on his Kindle page. His links will be added in the description below. Authors are the true heroes that allow for narration and enactments to be possible. Please show Gamalfrank your support if you enjoy this work, and check those links out below. Enjoy your stay, and on to the story. I work in law enforcement. A murdered family just knocked my loaded gun out of my hands to save my life. A story by Gamalfrank. I am a police officer, and I've been on the force for less than a year. When you're the youngest guy in the precinct, you get the worst assignments. You don't get the exciting things you see on television. You don't get to chase down fleeing suspects through alleys or solve complicated mysteries. You do the tedious, mind-numbing work the older guys refuse to do. You direct traffic around minor fender benders in the pouring rain. Sit in hospital waiting rooms with intoxicated individuals who need medical clearance before going into a holding cell. And sometimes you get guard duty. Guard duty is exactly what it sounds like. You sit in your cruiser and watch a building. Last week I was assigned to sit outside a residential house in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. A multiple homicide had occurred there earlier that same day. The details of the crime were brutal. Even by the standards of the veteran detectives, an entire family had been killed inside their home by an unknown intruder. A mother, a father, and 2 young children. The violence was extreme, and the sheer amount of blood left inside the house was something the crime scene technicians had complained about loudly in the break room before my shift started. The bodies had been removed in the late afternoon. The forensics team had spent hours collecting evidence, taking photos, and dusting for fingerprints. By 10 o'clock at night, they were finished for the day. They sealed the front door and back doors with bright yellow crime scene tape and locked the deadbolts and went home to sleep. My job was to park the cruiser on the street directly in front of the house and make sure no one crossed that yellow tape until detectives returned at 8 in the morning. I was instructed to stay in my car, keep the engine running for heat, and simply watch the property. It was supposed to be the easiest and most boring 8 hours of my life. The neighborhood was entirely silent. The houses were large, spaced far apart, and separated by tall hedges and old trees. The streetlights were dim, casting long moving shadows across the lawns whenever the wind blew. I parked my cruiser across the street from the crime scene, turned off my headlights, and settled into the driver's seat. I had a large thermos of coffee, a radio crackling quietly with the occasional dispatch of chatter, and completely unobstructed view of the dark, sealed house. The first few hours passed exactly as expected. I drank my coffee. I listened to the wind rustling the dead leaves on the pavement. I watched the dark windows of the house. Nothing moved. The entire structure felt heavy and dead, like a rotting tooth sitting in the middle of a perfectly smile of the neighborhood. Knowing what had happened inside those walls just prior made the stillness feel oppressive. I tried to think about other things, but my mind kept wandering back to the layout of the house and the violence that had soaked into the floorboards. At exactly 2 a.m., the atmosphere on the street shifted. The wind had died down completely. The constant low static of my police radio cut out, leaving a thick, suffocating silence inside the cabin of my cruiser. The air temperature dropped rapidly, and my windows began to fog up from the inside. I reached to adjust the heater dial, turning it to the maximum setting. As I pulled my hand back from the dashboard, I looked up through the windshield. A light turned on inside the sealed house. It was a warm yellow glow coming from a large window on the second floor. Based on the briefing I received before my shift, I knew the window belonged to the master bedroom. It was the primary location of the attack, where the parents had been killed. I sat frozen in my seat for several seconds, staring at the illuminated window. The yellow crime scene tape stretched across the front door was completely undisturbed. I checked my rearview mirrors, scanning the dark street for any strange vehicles. There was nothing. Protocol dictates that if an officer observes suspicious activity at a sealed crime scene, they must investigate a potential break-in. Evidence tampering is a severe issue, and looters occasionally target homes where tragedies have occurred, knowing the owners will not be returning. I picked up my radio, microphone, and pressed the transmit button, intending to notify dispatch that I had a potential trespasser and was moving to investigate. I spoke into the microphone, giving my unit number and my location. I waited for the dispatcher to reply. Only dead, heavy silence came through the speaker. There was no static, no automated tone, nothing. The radio was completely dead. I cursed under my breath. I clipped the microphone back onto the dashboard. I could not just sit in my car and watch the light. If somebody was inside destroying evidence, I would lose my job for failing to act. I unbuckled my seatbelt, pulled my heavy metal flashlight from the center console, and stepped out into the freezing night air. I closed the cruiser door as quietly as possible. I kept my hand resting on the grip of my service weapon, secured in the holster on my hip. I walked across the dark street, my heavy boots completely silent on the asphalt. I approached the driveway of the house, the yellow tape stretching across the front porch, fluttering slightly, though there was no wind. I decided to check the perimeter before attempting to enter. I walked around the side of the house, sweeping the beam of my flashlight over the grass, the bushes, and the first floor windows. Everything was locked tight. There was no broken panes of glass and no forced entry marks on the window frames. I reached the back of the house. The rear patio door was a heavy sliding glass unit. The crime scene tape was still crossed over the glass, but the door itself was open by a fraction of an inch. The lock had been disengaged. I stood to the side of the glass door, listening intently. I could not hear any movement inside. I reached out, grabbed the handle, and slowly slid the heavy door open. It slid along the metal track with a soft, metallic, grinding noise. I stepped inside the house and turned on my flashlight. The smell hit me immediately. It was a thick, metallic odor that coated the back of my throat, mixed with the harsh, stinging scent of chemical bleach used by the forensic cleaners. It smelled like raw copper and voided bowels. I pulled my uniform collar up over my nose and mouth, trying to block out the worst of the stench. I was standing in the kitchen. The beam of my flashlight illuminated the remnants of the struggle. Chairs were overturned. A large pool of dried, dark blood stained the linoleum floor near the refrigerator. Small plastic evidence markers, numbered with bright yellow paint, were scattered across the counters and the floor, indicating where the shell casings and personal items had been collected. I moved slowly and deliberately, relying on my training. I cleared the kitchen, the dining room, and the downstairs living area. I found no one. The house was completely empty on the first floor. I approached the wooden staircase leading to the second floor. The warm yellow light from the master bedroom was spilling out into the upstairs hallway, casting long, distorted shadows across the carpet. I unholstered my service weapon. I held the flashlight in my left hand, resting the heavy metal barrel across my right wrist to support the gun. I began to climb the stairs, placing my feet on the edges of the wooden steps to minimize any creaking. The walls alongside the staircase were smeared with large, erratic streaks of dried blood. It looked as though someone had tried to drag themselves up the stairs, leaving a horrific trail of red handprints on beige wallpaper. I kept my weapon aimed upward, watching the illuminated landing. I reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the hallway. The master bedroom was located at the very end of the hall. The door was wide open. The lamp, sitting on the overturned nightstand, was the source of the light. I moved down the hallway, pressing my back against the wall. I reached the edge of the bedroom door frame. I took a deep breath, pivoted quickly around the corner, and pointed my weapon into the room. "Police! Show your hands!" I yelled. My voice echoed loudly into the empty house. Nobody answered. The room was completely devoid of life. I kept my gun raised and stepped fully into the master bedroom. The destruction in this room was absolute. The large mattress was half off the box spring, soaked through with massive dark red stains. The dresser drawers had been pulled out and emptied onto the floor. The closet doors were shattered, the wood splintered and broken. The amount of blood on the walls and the carpet was staggering. It looked like an abattoir. I lowered my gun slightly, thoroughly confused. I had checked the entire house. There was no intruder. There was no looter. The back door must have been left slightly ajar by a careless forensic technician, and a faulty timer or a bad wiring connection had turned the lamp on. I felt a surge of relief mixed with annoyance. I had worked myself into a panic over nothing. I turned off my flashlight to save battery and hooked it back into my duty belt. I prepared to leave the room, go back downstairs, lock the sliding door, and return to the warmth of my cruiser. As I turned towards the hallway, a small movement on the wall caught my attention. I stopped. I stared at the beige drywall near the closet. A thick, dark droplet of blood was resting above the white baseboard. I watched it closely. The droplet was gathering mass, pooling together from a larger, dried smear. Then the droplet moved. It moved upward. I stood frozen in the center of the destroyed room, unable to comprehend what my eyes were seeing. The dark droplet slowly slid up the drywall, defying gravity entirely. It traveled a few inches, merged with a larger streak of dried blood, and then the entire streak began to move. I looked around the room. The entire environment was shifting. The massive dark red stains soaking the carpet began to shrink. The blood was pulling itself backward, flowing up from the carpet fibers and rising into the air in tiny reverse droplets. The droplets flew across the room and splashed back onto the walls, sinking into the paint and disappearing completely, leaving the beige drywall perfectly clean. The heavy oak nightstand lying on its side suddenly jerked. It scraped silently across the carpet, inching backwards. It uprighted itself in a smooth, continuous motion, returning to its original position next to the bed. The lamp resting on top of it flickered, the shattered bulb reassembling itself from the broken glass fragments on the ground. I watched the destroyed mattress slide perfectly back into the box spring. The massive, horrifying bloodstains faded away into the fabric, leaving a crisp, clean white sheets. The splintered wood of the closet doors flew back together, sealing the cracks and hanging perfectly in their hinges. I could not move. I could not breathe. My mind completely rejected the visual information. I was watching the laws of physics fracture and break inside a suburban home. The overwhelming smell of raw copper and bleach rapidly faded, replaced by the scent of fresh laundry detergent and a vanilla room spray. Within 60 seconds, the master bedroom was pristine. It looked like a photograph from a real estate magazine. There was absolutely no trace of the horrific slaughter that had occurred just hours ago. The bed was made, the furniture was perfect, the carpet was spotless. The absolute terrifying perfection of the room broke my paralysis. I took a step backwards towards the hallway, desperate to get out of the house. Then I heard the sound. It came from the first floor, near the front entrance. It was the heavy, distinct thud of a large boot stepping onto the bottom of the wooden staircase. I stopped moving. My heart knocked violently against my ribs, sending a painful throbbing sensation into my throat. I raised my service weapon again, aiming it through the open bedroom doorway and down the hall towards the top of the stairs. Another heavy thud, a second step. Then a voice began to hum. It was a man's voice, deep and resonant. He was humming a slow, simple melody. It sounded like an old lullaby, the kind of tune a parent might sing to calm a crying child. The humming echoed up the stairs, filling the pristine, silent house with a chilling, casual rhythm. Thud. Another step. The humming stopped, and the man spoke. His voice was calm, conversational, and entirely devoid of emotion. "I'm coming upstairs now," the man had said. "Do not try to hide. Do not make this difficult. Just stay right there. It will be over soon." A surge of terror flooded my chest. The calm certainty in his voice was infinitely more horrifying than any angry scream. My police training tried to override my panic. I gripped my weapon with both hands, locking my elbows, keeping the sights aligned directly at the top of the staircase landing. "Police!" I screamed. My voice cracked loudly. "Stop right there! Don't take another step! Show me your hands or I will shoot!" The heavy boots did not pause. Thud. Thud. The man resumed humming the slow, simple melody. He ignored my warnings entirely. He was climbing the stairs with a steady, unhurried pace. I could hear the wood creaking under his weight. I could picture him ascending, getting closer to the second floor. Sweat poured down my forehead, stinging my eyes. My finger applied a small amount of pressure to the trigger. I was prepared to fire the moment a human silhouette cleared the top step. Thud. Thud. The footsteps reached the top landing. I braced myself. The humming grew significantly louder as the man walked down the hallway. He was approaching the master bedroom. His heavy boots stepped onto the carpet floor of the hall, the sound muffling slightly, but remaining distinct at and terrifying close. He was just outside the bedroom door. The footsteps stopped. The humming ceased abruptly. I stood in the center of the pristine bedroom, aiming my gun at the empty doorway. The silence was absolute. I held my breath, waiting for him to step around the corner. I waited for the intruder to show his face. The heavy wooden door of the bedroom, which had been standing wide open, suddenly began to move. It slowly creaked inward, pushing towards the hallway, closing the gap. Then the handle turned, and the door swung wide open, revealing the entire frame. I focused my sight on the center of the doorway. There was nothing there. The hallway completely empty. The dim light from the bedroom illuminated the beige carpet and the blank walls of the corridor. There was no man in heavy boots. There was no intruder. I stared at the empty space, my arms trembling violently under the weight of the gun. The intense, coiled anticipation in my muscles suddenly unraveled. I let out a massive, shuddering breath. I lowered my weapon by an inch, completely overwhelmed by the lack of a physical threat. I thought the house was playing tricks on my mind. I thought the stress of the job had finally caused a severe auditory hallucination. I relaxed my grip on my firearm. A massive, freezing force slammed brutally into both my hands. It felt like somebody had swung a baseball bat directly into my knuckles. The impact was entirely invisible, but the body physical pain was blinding. My fingers instantly went numb, losing all motor control. My service weapon was knocked cleanly out of my grip. The heavy metal gun clattered loudly against the pristine floor and slid rapidly under the bed, completely out of reach. I stumbled backwards, crying out in pain, clutching my throbbing wrists against my chest. I looked frantically around the empty room, searching for whatever had hit me. I looked in the far corner of the bedroom near the closet window. The air in the corner was warping and distorting like heat rising off hot asphalt. A shape was forming in distortion. It was not a man. It was a massive, tangled lump of pale, bruised flesh. As the shape solidified, my mind completely broke. I looked at the fused, grotesque mask of human bodies, 4 distinct torsos, a tangle of broken arms and legs, all crushed and melted together into a single agonizing pile of meat. Rising from the top of the mass were 4 heads, fused together at the cheeks and skulls. Their faces were stretched and warped, their eyes wide and completely white, lacking pupils or irises. Their mouths were open impossibly wide, the jaws unhinged. They were staring directly at me. They were screaming. The scream produced no sound in the air. Instead, the noise exploded directly inside the center of my skull. It was deafening, agonizing pressure, a chorus of 4 voices shouting in pure, unadulterated terror.
Run!
The voices pounded against my brain.
Get out! He is here! Run, or you will be killed! Run!
The pressure in my head intensified, pushing me backwards towards the door. I did not hesitate for a second. I abandoned my training. I abandoned my weapon. I turned and sprinted. I dove through the open bedroom doorway, throwing myself into the hallway. I did not look back. I ran down the corridor and threw myself down the wooden staircase, skipping multiple steps at a time. I crashed onto the first floor landing, my heavy boots sliding on the linoleum of the kitchen. I grabbed the handle of the sliding glass door and yanked it open with a brutal force. I scrambled out onto the back of the patio, vaulted over the wooden railing, and sprinted through the dark grass of the backyard. I ran around the side of the house, my lungs burning, the freezing night air tearing at my throat. I reached the front yard and crashed completely through the yellow crime tape, snapping it in half. I did not stop until I reached my cruiser. I grabbed the door handle, threw myself into the driver's seat, and slammed the door shut, locking all 4 doors instantly. I sat in the dark cabin of the police car, hyperventilating, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I stared at the house. The warm, yellow light in the master bedroom window had turned off. The house was completely dark and silent once again. I did not use my radio. I did not call for backup. I knew perfectly well that if I had told dispatch a ghost had knocked my gun under a bed and told me to run, I would be subjected to a mandatory psychological evaluation and permanently removed from duty. I sat in the cruiser, shivering violently, waiting for the night to end. I waited for 4 agonizing hours. I watched the sky slowly turn from pitch black to a pale, bruised purple, and finally to a cold, bright morning blue. The sun rose over the neighborhood, casting long morning shadows across the lawns. At 7 o'clock, I knew the detectives and the crime scene cleaners would be arriving soon. I could not let them find my service weapon under the bed. An officer losing their gun at a secured scene is a career-ending offense. I forced myself to open the cruiser door. My hands were still shaking. I walked back across the street, stepped over the broken yellow tape, and walked around to the back patio. The sliding glass door was still open exactly as I had left it. I stepped inside the kitchen. The smell of raw copper, voided valves, and chemical bleach instantly assaulted my senses. I walked slowly up the stairs, dreading what I would find. I reached the top landing and looked down the hallway. The master bedroom was open. I stepped inside. The room was a destroyed slaughterhouse. The magic trick was over. The mattress was half the box spring soaked in a massive dark red bloodstains. The dresser drawers were emptied onto the floor. The closets were splintered and broken. The beige drywall covered in horrific smears of blood. I looked under the bed. My heavy metal service weapon was resting on the blood-soaked carpet exactly where it had slid after being knocked from my hands. I knelt down, picked up the gun, wiped the dust off the barrel on my uniform pants, and securely holstered it. I walked out the house, closed the sliding door, and walked back to the street just as the cars and the detective units pulled up to the curb. I nodded to the detectives, signed the custody log, handing the scene over to them, and drove my cruiser back to the precinct to end my shift. I did not tell my supervisor what happened. I went to the locker room, took off my uniform, and sat on the wooden bench. Staring blankly at the metal door of my locker, I felt sick, hollow, and deeply terrified by the reality I now had to accept. An older officer walked into the locker room. He was a veteran, a man who had been patrolling the cities for nearly 30 years. He had deep lines around his eyes and a calm, quiet demeanor. He walked over to his locker, 2 rows down from mine, and began taking off his duty belt. He stopped and looked over at me. He watched me sitting pale and trembling on the bench. "Rough night on guard duty?" he asked quietly. It was fine, I lied quickly, forcing my voice to sound steady. Just cold, boring. The older officer sighed. He closed his locker door and walked over to my bench. He sat down next to me. He did not look at me. He just stared straight ahead at the rows of lockers. "You don't have to lie to me," he said. His voice was heavy and tired. "I saw the assignment sheet. I know which house you were sitting outside last night." I swallowed hard, looking down at my boots. I did not say anything. "Let me ask you a question," the older officer continued, keeping his voice low. "Did the house put itself back together?" My head snapped up. I stared at him, my eyes wide with shock. A cold chill ran down my spine. Though I refused to let the cliché words form in my head, he knew. He knew exactly what happened. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I whispered. The blood went back into the walls, the furniture moved, and then someone walked up the stairs. The veteran cop nodded, slowly, resting his elbows on his knees. "It's your first time," he said gently. "You'll get used to it eventually. Or you'll quit. Most guys quit after the first exposure." "What was it?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "What was in that house?" He leaned back against the lockers. "When terrible things happen in a confined space, extreme violence, profound terror, the environment absorbs it. The location becomes thin. It becomes a scar on the world." He looked at me, his eyes dead serious. "There are things out there," he explained. "Evil things. Parasitic things. They do not have bodies, but they have hunger. When a place becomes thin from violence, those things use the residual trauma. They reset the stage, replay the events leading up to the slaughter, creating a perfect loop. They use the echo of the crime to lure new people inside so they can feed on fresh terror." I thought about the calm, casual voice humming the melody, the confidence of the footsteps. "You were lucky," the officer said, standing up from the bench. "Very lucky. Usually the people who get lured into the loop do not walk out." He picked up his duffel bag and threw it over his shoulder. "Do not talk about this to the brass," he warned me. "They will put you on desk duty and mandate therapy. Just keep your head down and do your job." He walked towards the exit of the locker room before pushing the door open. He stopped and looked back at me one last time. "Be more careful in the future, kid," he spoke. "Now that you've seen the other side of the curtain, the things on the other side can see you too. They know you can perceive them, and they love an audience." He walked out, leaving me alone in the silent room. I'm writing this down now because I need to get it out of my head. I am still a police officer. I still patrol the streets at night, but I do not look at the dark windows of houses anymore. And if I am ever assigned guard duty at a murder scene again, I am not getting out of my cruiser no matter what happens, no matter what I see. Thank you for staying till the end. If you enjoyed this narration, please hit like and subscribe. Furthermore, show Gamalfrank, the author of today's narration, some love by visiting his Reddit and Novella link on Kindle in the description below. A big thank you to Gamalfrank for allowing me to bring his story to life. Please support the authors of these narrations, as they are the real heroes. Without their words, there is no life to be filled. I am but a voice to their masterpiece. Like a tree, the authors are the roots that give the vibrance and the foliage to what is seen. So please, show Gamalfrank your love and support. And thank you, fellow travelers, for visiting KnightMareGiver. We hope you enjoyed your stay, and come again very soon. Goodbye for now.